Hi everybody, welcome to another table talk. As the title says, today's discussion I just want to go over the foam and reinforcements that I use quite often when I build my park jets. I had quite a discussion about this in a previous video where I talked about sort of my new build philosophy for utilizing the right foam in the right place to get my planes to be strong, light, and perform the way that I want them to in the air. But today I'm just going to talk specifically, this is kind of the continuing series of my park jet workshop video redo, I guess. So I wanted to talk to you today specifically about the foams and some of the reinforcements that I use building my park jets. So let's get right into it. This is Depron. This is a sheet. I get this from the U.S. place called RC Foam. I will have a blog post supporting this video, so there'll be lots of links available. This is actually still the hobby grade stuff. I bought this several years ago, or I guess about 2-3 years ago now, in a big box of 20 sheets. So I've been kind of hoarding it. It has kind of a skin on one side of it, so that keeps it really nice and flat. You can still buy it. The company that made it doesn't make the hobby grade stuff anymore. You can still buy Depron, but on the RC Foam website, anyway, where I buy it in Colorado and in the U.S., it says that it has a slight curvature. Now I know there's lots of people that still build with it. There's different techniques for getting it to flatten, or when you're building your wings or whatever, just make sure that you reinforce. So that it helps to flatten it. You can also heat it up. Probably heat it with, I would say, heat it with some warm water, and then press it down between a couple pieces of plywood or something like that. You want to be very, very careful if you trying to heat it up. Maybe with a hair dryer set on low, but with a heat gun it might get too hot, and the foam can melt and deteriorate very quickly. So anyway, the nice thing about building with Depron, other than the wings for my planes, other than the wings, I don't need any any reinforcement really. I don't reinforce my vertical stabilizers, my elevons, things like that I have to with some other foams. However, it is expensive. It's the most expensive foam by far that I build with, but it is nice to build with. It cuts nice and clean. It is a bit brittle, but when it breaks, it tends to if you have a snapping break, it breaks pretty clean. You can glue it back together. Like most foams, if you thump the nose in and you have sort of a crushing wound, so to speak, you can warm it up again with warm water, hot water. And sort of squeeze it back into shape, push it back into shape a little bit. But anyway, I know this is less expensive and more readily available in lots of the parts of the world. It's not used as insulation here in North America, so pretty much all the use for Depron is hobby grade. But I've built many planes out of this. It's a good product, and I still use small amounts of it in my builds, as you've seen or you may have seen in the other video that I will link in the blog post. So that's Depron. The stuff I get comes in 700 millimeter by 1 meter, so about 27 inches by 39 inches. So it's a good size for building most of the park jets that I build. Okay, so that's Depron. Put that down there, and that's the. There are two other grades of Depron you'll see. There's Aero Depron and Gray Depron. I've never built with Aero Depron, but I have had some pieces of Gray Depron sent to me by RC Foam sort of as a freebie, and it is quite a bit softer. I think it's more the consistency of model plane foam. So there are like I said, Gray and Aero, but I think from everything that I've read, they are softer, more flexible than that Depron that I was showing you. Okay, so this is model plane foam. It's actually, what is it, Fly Power Value XPS, I think. I think it's model plane foam made by Adams, I think. and just under another name. Now it's this is a 24-inch by 48-inch sheet. Of course, you can see it's quite a bit more flexible. This is similar to. You're not going to be able to see this probably in the video, but I'll have closer pictures. So this is a kind of a rough, wavy side. It's equivalent to model plane foam grade B. Model plane foam sells grade A and grade B. They're the same stiffness. The grade A is just smoother on both sides. So they make the grade B, and it's less expensive. So I use this stuff because I can get it from RC Foam. It ends up being a little cheaper for me because of the shipping costs. But it's good. But it is more flexible. So if I build a plane where the elevons and the vertical stabilizers, for example, are made out of model plane form, I will reinforce those on the size planes that I build, because if not, they tend to be too flexible and flop around a little bit when the plane's flying. So it does take a little bit. I find it has sort of a fiber that runs through it. Again, I'll try and show in pictures. On this side, you can almost see that it's got like a wave, almost like a grain, I guess, like plywood, I suppose, although it's quite a bit smoother on this side, and it just feels like when you're cutting it, there's like a little bit of a fiber maybe within the foam. So it does tend to dull blades faster. It is softer. It's a little bit more. It's easier to form. If you're making fuselages or canopies or something like that, and it does sand a little nicer than Depron. But you do have to be careful because it is soft and it will sand. If you're not paying attention, you can sand it too thin or sand a hole through it if you're really not careful. But anyway, so that's model plane foam, grade B, grade A. They're the same strength. Just pardon me. The grade B has quite a bit of roughness on one side. But you can actually, even if you make a mistake, I've made the mistake where I've had the rough side on the outside. It doesn't take much work to sand that smooth. Again, pretty inexpensive. About per square foot, it's about half the price of Depron, and I built lots of planes with this, like the entire plane out of it. Works really well, durable, and inexpensive. Okay. So I build with, if you watch the video, which again I'll have in the blog post, I've done a lot more building recently with Adam's Ready Board. Excuse me. Because it's very inexpensive. It takes a little bit more work, because you have to sort of decide where you're going to leave the paper on, where you're going to leave the paper off. The paper on provides a lot of strength, but that also adds a lot of weight. So I started building with buying the two different colors. It's just the paper that's the different color. The foam is white. The foam underneath the paper is exactly the same. A friend of mine, a fellow countryman, Peter, Homie 666 on the RC Powers forum, gave me a heads up on this stuff with the black paper. The paper on this peels off a lot easier and a lot cleaner. So when I'm building a plane where I know I'm going to take all the paper off, pardon me, for example, with parts like KF airfoils, fuselages, canopies, all that sort of stuff, I'll cut them out of the black stuff because it's just a lot easier. It seems to be much easier to take the paper off and more consistent. Sometimes the white stuff, and again the foam is exactly the same. Sometimes the white stuff, depending on the production run, the paper will come off quite easily, and then other times it's I've had to use like an alcohol water solution to soften up the paper to get it to peel off, and even then sometimes I've had to gently scrape the paper off the foam after it's wet. I use the white obviously for places where I'm going to paint, just because it's a lot easier to paint over white than it is to paint over the black paper. But that's why I buy the two different colors now. Very inexpensive. It's the least expensive of all the foams. It is a bit more fussy to build with, to get it, trimming the paper off, and then you have to treat it with oil-based Minwax to keep the paper waterproof. But it's inexpensive and it's readily available to me. And now that I've built several planes with it, or a combination of it with model plane foam or Depron, I'm really pleased with how that works. So as I've mentioned in that video, going forward I'll be building a lot more with Adams Ready Board. Okay, I do use a little bit occasionally. Luckily enough, again, RC Foam occasionally has put scrap pieces or freebie pieces of foam in my with my shipments, which I'm very happy with. I don't get any kickbacks or anything, but if you're in North America, RC Foam has, for me, have just been great to deal with. Great customer service, and they do their best to keep the shipping rates down. Of course, I live on the west coast of Canada, so Colorado is a little closer to me than Model Plane Foam headquarters is, which I think is in Ohio. So it's a little. I buy that from them because they're closer and cheaper. So anyway, this is 3mm Depron. I don't use a lot of this. I've had this sheet. I think this was a half sheet, so I don't know, 13.5 inches by 39 inches or something like that. But sometimes, if you've you need to fill a gap somewhere, or I've made mistakes where maybe I've cut the servo hole a little bit too big and the servo's kind of loose there. It's nice, you can cut a little piece of this, and it's relatively soft, so you can actually probably pinch it. With all the foams you can pinch it. So if you have, like you're going to put a tab into a slot and it's a little bit big, you haven't quite cut the slot open, it's actually sometimes easier just sort of pinch the tab a little bit along the top, and then you can slide that into the slot rather than hacking the slot bigger. So this has been really handy. Like I said, 3mm Depron. If I need to gap fill, or what I've found I've used it for sometimes now is that the difference between paperless Dollar Tree foam, when you take the paper off, it's 4.5 millimeters. Most parked up plans, 99.9% of them, are designed to use 6mm wide foam. So sometimes if I've cut a gap, slot too big, and I go to put that in there, I can use a little bit of this to sort of help fill the gap and keep it, keep the plane everything nice and aligned while the glue is drying, and keep it nice and strong. So anyway, not that you have to rush out and buy 3mm Depron, but I found that it's become really handy for me. And even in a real pinch, pardon the pun, you can paperless Dollar Tree foam. You can squeeze that down to quite a bit thinner, and even if you probably warmed it up a little bit, you could probably pinch it down to 2-3 millimeters maybe even, and use that if you need to gap fill somewhere. I know a lot of people, rather than in my paint and finish video, I talked about using some lightweight spackle to fill grooves, and I know there's lots of people, and I've experimented with it myself as well, is using very thin strips of foam and gluing those into those gaps, where you've made the score and fold. You've got that little groove you want to fill in to make it nice and smooth. I know people have done that as well. And Dollar Tree foam or a soft foam is a good thing to do that, because you can kind of bend it and mold it a little better. And then after the glue dries, give it a nice sanding, and doesn't add any weight to your plane. I just find using the spackle, the weight, the weight addition is probably the same as if I was using scrap foam. It's just much easier for me to use the spackle. I just have to put it on and then just wait for overnight for it to dry. I just find it's easier that way for me to do. Okay, so that was the foams. So for reinforcement in my planes, I use 2 different sizes of carbon fiber, and again I get this from RC Foam. It's really good, high quality carbon. I have experimented years ago where I bought some carbon tube, 3mm carbon tube, I think from Hobby King. They used to come in 750mm lengths, and I bought 10 of them. It was really cheap. It arrived, and about 3 of them were crushed, and I strongly suspect that it was actually more fiberglass than it was actually carbon fiber, because it was quite flexible. I like to use, this is 4mm carbon rod, so it's really strong. It's twice as heavy. This is 3mm carbon tube. It's twice as heavy as the tube, but what I like to use this for is sort of my one main wing spar, because it's super strong. So a 24-inch length of this, let's say, and a 27-inch wingspan makes for a really, really strong wing. And I know it's adding a little bit of weight, but for me it's one of those things that I'm adding functional weight. I'm not just adding weight for fun. So that's what I use. I like to use 4mm carbon rod primarily for my main wing spar. And then for any other areas where I want to use carbon fiber reinforcement, or if I have areas that are longer, say, than about 10 or 11 inches, I will use, this is 3mm carbon tube. And I can't remember what the inside diameter is. I think that this stuff that I bought has the thickest walls of the tube that you can buy, but it's still pretty light. But you can see it's quite a bit more flexible than the 4mm carbon rod, but works really, really well. The nice thing about this stuff is that I don't I don't ever throw any of it away. I've got a couple of boxes over here at the end of my very well organized workbench that I keep. If I recycle a plane on purpose or by accident, I will take the carbon fiber out, give it a good inspection, especially if you crash. I'll give it a good inspection, especially if I crash the plane, to make sure that there's no weaknesses, or that the carbon has started to delaminate or come apart. But it's a very good and easy to recycle, so it saves you a lot of money. So that's what I do. I very rarely now, because I have enough stockpiled pieces of carbon fiber rod and tube, I just recycle it. It takes a little bit. It's a little bit tedious to get all the old epoxy and foam off of them, but you can do it, and then just recycle it again. Just inspect it and make sure there's no fractures or anything in it, especially if you've crashed the plane. All right, so that's carbon fiber. The other thing I like to use a lot now, just to save me money, is these bamboo barbecue skewers. I buy these from the dollar store. Get they're 12 inches long. Get like 100 of them or something for $1. I find that in lengths of sort of maybe up to 11 inches, depending. You just have to sort of go through your stockpile and see which ones are stronger. But I find that in spans of, like, say 10 inches maybe, that this stuff, once you've glued it into the plane, is equally as strong as the 3mm carbon tube, because it is a bit porous. So because I use epoxy when I put this into my plane, the bamboo does absorb a tiny bit of the epoxy as the epoxy is curing, so it makes for quite strong. But again, I only use it for about 10-inch spans, and rather than having to cut up a whole bunch of pieces of carbon, it's a lot easier if I've got something that's 10 inches or less. I can custom cut this stuff. It's a much easier and cheaper. So I use a lot of bamboo skewers to strengthen my planes, like elevons and vertical stabilizers, that sort of thing. Very cheap, but works really, really well. Okay, a couple other things that I like to use. Just good old popsicle sticks. You pick these up at the dollar store for very, very cheap. I'll cut sections if I want a section reinforced, let's say around a motor mount, or I've had a particularly weak area of my plane. If I can, on the inside, I'll take a section of popsicle stick and then just epoxy it onto that, and it just gives you good lateral strength lengthwise. If you need to do that. So popsicle sticks work really well. Also, these are tongue depressors. Again, I get these at the dollar store. These are a little bit thinner this way, but of course quite a bit wider. So if you need an area to, I actually used these when I built my MiG-35B completely out of Dollar Tree foam. Pardon me. The nacelles on the bottom were quite were a bit weak and flexible. So I actually glued a couple of these onto the bottom of my one on each side of my on each nacelle, right, sort of where the plane was going to touch the ground, just to give it some extra strength and durability. So yeah, I make use of these occasionally, popsicle sticks and tongue depressors. And you know, I use epoxy when I put those on, holds them nice and firmly. And then sort of the last thing, I covered this a bit in my video where I talked about glues and tapes. This is your, you know, your fiberglass mesh drywall tape that's got, you know, a little bit of adhesive on one side so you can stick it on an area. So pardon me, if you need an area, you need to reinforce an area on your plane, like along the bottom, say, of the battery bay. If you're using a flexible foam, you can put this on. And then I use you know, this, again, I talked about this glue. This glue dries, it's like foam cure, Bob Smith Industries foam cure. It dries hard, just like an epoxy. So you can actually use epoxy, but you want to glue. You don't want to use something like hot glue, because hot glue will you know, add a ton of weight. So I just you know, once I set this section of tape down, you know, I just smear some glue on it and then take a piece of scrap foam or something and squeegee it on, so it's like a poor man's fiberglass. So yeah, so those are the ways that that I use, the foam that I use, and the reinforcements that I use to keep my planes light and strong and performing the way that I want to in the air. So again, please check the comments down below. There'll be a link to a blog post that I'm going to write up that will have links to the products that I use, that I have to buy, or that I can buy in the store, or that I have to buy online. Obviously, you know, popsicle sticks, bamboo skewers. I would imagine that fiberglass drywall tape. I would imagine you can get that locally where you live. The links that I'm going to have, you know, if you live in North America, they'll be worthwhile. Probably outside of North America, not so much, but. Anyway, if you have any questions, comments, please leave them down below or on the blog post. Thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.